thank you so much to be there. I know
Okay.
you do not need any kind of an introduction, but as a part of the courtesy, without wasting time, I'll just narrate a brief introduction of yours. So, Padam Shri Barkha ma'am has been working as a journalist for more than 25 years. And in 2008, she got Padam Shri. And majority of the time, I think she has served in NDTV, an epitome of women leadership in the field of journalism, I think. She has covered some of the daring areas like Kargil and even the Arab Spring. Right now, she is also covering a lot of elections on ground. She has the approach, keeping the boots on the ground rather than directly communicating from the New Delhi. And she's also spearheading the movement which is called We the Women. And she has been named among the global leaders for tomorrow by World Economic Forums maybe twice. Correct me, ma'am, if I'm wrong. And the last thing which I knew in the COVID last year, you were 4 months going into that during lockdown. You were on the road and interviewing people. I saw your videos on the YouTube where you were directly communicating to them and letting the unheard news coming onto the mainstream media. Hats off, and we are really privileged to be with you. And I think you know the structure that 20 minutes will be your topic uninterrupted. And next 20 minutes or 40 minutes, depending on whatever you give it, the time you bless us with, we'll be having direct questions moderated by me. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gaurav, and hi, everyone. And thank you. It's a great pleasure to be talking to all of you. I welcome any question you want to ask me in the Q&A session. I was asked to speak about 5 mantras from the world of media that would also apply to management, and I know you're all in this executive management program, so I'm going to try and talk about principles that I would say are relatable across professions. That it doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur, it doesn't matter whether you are a executive, it doesn't matter whether you're a salaried professional, it doesn't matter whether you're in academia. These are largely principles that I've learned, I think, from my life as a journalist, but I think in a VUCA world, which is what the backdrop is, in an increasingly volatile, uncertain world, are there certain certainties of leadership, of life goals, of life principles that we could follow and make sense of in a world that increasingly doesn't make too much sense. In any case, this pandemic has upended all our conventional notions of leadership and what works and what doesn't work. So let me start by talking a little bit about what I believe are principles that, irrespective of what profession you're in, you'll need. And I'll give you examples from my life and how these have played out in my life. So just to give you a little bit of context, in 2017, I decided that I'd wanted to move on from NDTV. I had spent 2 decades there, and more than 2 decades, in fact. And I thought it was time for a change. In my mind, I wanted to at least be the owner and not the employee. That was the idea I had in my head. But I wasted about a year and a half exploring offers from other channels. I even tried my hand at a couple of them. Nothing really worked. I didn't really like anything. A lot of people told me I was crazy to leave the safety and security of an established brand. Why did I do it at all? And so on. And at that time, I decided to launch this forum for women, which was called We the Women. And it started off as an annual offline event. This is pre-COVID, we're still talking about. It started off as an annual offline event. And it was kind of like a festival of ideas, but with a gender lens on issues. So men were welcome and invited, but the focus was very much on issues related to gender. So that was one of the few independent properties that I created, and it took off quite well. And we started in Bombay, and we were soon in multiple cities. We had, we had sponsors, we had a certain degree of revenue coming in. And then I took this revenue and I basically launched what I do today, which is that I run a digital video first platform, though we have a website also now called the Mojo Story. And Mojo actually means magic. And my idea was, how do you get the magic back in news? News, as I had sort of experienced it, had begun to feel very stale. टीवी पुराना लगने लग गया था, टीवी के फॉर्मेट्स पुराने लगने लग गए थे, मैं बोर हो गई थी और मुझे लगा कि ऑडियंसेस भी बोर हो गए हैं. And it was a kind of mutual बोरियत कि audience is also bored, I am also bored. So how do you reinvent? So this took us to the end of 2019 when Mojo Story was registered. And as coincidence or destiny or fate would have it, one after the other, there were these really huge news events. We started as a team of 4 people running out of the basement of my house, literally like a basement startup. And, we had first the citizenship legislation, uske baad uske protest shuru ho gaye, student protest. उसके बाद ट्रम्प की विजिट थी इंडिया, he came to India. उसके बाद दिल्ली में riots हो गए. So this took us to the February of 2020, and then as we all know, by the March of 2020 was the lockdown, and we were in 2 years of COVID. And basically, I'll talk a little bit about how these 2 years shaped my life. And in some ways, I always say that if I had to bookend my more than 2 decades in journalism, I would say from Kargil to COVID, everything I've learned. For those of you who are too young to know, in 1999 I went to the front line to report on the Kargil war between India and Pakistan. और उसके बाद अगर मेरा कोई transformative, difficult, dangerous experience रहा है, that has been the experience of reporting on the pandemic from across India. So if I had to frame the decades of my journalistic career, I would say from Kargil to COVID, everything I learned and also unlearned. And मैं ये unlearning की बात जरूर करना चाहूँगी later in the conversation. So what happened was that Mojo was registered. I was very clear that I was a visual storyteller. So a lot of digital storytellers, they start with text and then they move to video. But my journey was very much the opposite. I first created a brand, We the Women. Then I registered my meta brand, which was Mojo. Then I said, "Mujhe karna kya isme?" And I knew that I was somebody who, liked to go out there to difficult places where other people didn't go to, and bring the stories of people whose stories were normally ignored by mainstream media. So that is the template with which I began. And we had no idea that COVID, while it was tragic and it was difficult and it was dangerous, actually it gave us the kind of opportunity that we had never experienced before. Because suddenly, आपके जो बड़े-बड़े media houses थे, उसमें से कोई निकला नहीं बाहर lockdown के दौरान. Although media was an exempt essential service, we were allowed to go out. जो COVID की first 60 days की reporting थी, वो ज़्यादातर independent digital platforms पे हुई, और छोटे-छोटे शहरों में जो छोटे-छोटे stringers होते हैं, photographers होते हैं, जो बिल्कुल local journalists हैं, उन्होंने की. तो एक मौका न्यू मीडिया को मिला टू प्ले एट द सेम लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड एज बिग मीडिया. और दूसरी चीज क्या हुई कि टेक्नोलॉजी इतनी बदल चुकी थी, वैसे ही सबके वर्किंग एनवायरनमेंट्स वर्क फ्रॉम होम हो चुके थे, वैसे ही अब इट वाज टोटली नॉर्मल कि आप किसी को बुलाना चाहे तो बोले हम आपको लिंक भेज रहे हैं. पहले का तामझाम की जरूरत नहीं थी. You didn't have to send big satellite vans with those big dishes. You didn't have to send camera crews. Nobody was meeting each other. So suddenly, for the startup environment in media, if you were skilled and if you had the passion, you had the guts, the world was your oyster, because you were suddenly at the same level playing field as the big channels. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I left my home in March, and one day after the lockdown was announced, मैं ऐसे घूमने के लिए निकली दिल्ली के border तक, और मैंने देखा कि वहां कोई भी नहीं था. Literally, I was that day I was the only journalist there, handful of police constables, and I saw this long line of people just leaving, men, women, children, शहर छोड़ के जा रहे थे. और मैं उनके पीछे पीछे भागी. मैंने कहा, आप कहाँ जा रहे हैं? बोले, हम अपने गांव जा रहे हैं. क्यों जाने नहीं, यहाँ तो सब कुछ बंद है, कमाई कैसे होगी? They were obviously daily wages, and हालांकि there was an order from the government कि आप इनको पूरी तनख्वाह दीजिए, आप इनको रहने दीजिए अपने मकानों में. ऐसा कुछ नहीं हुआ. And in any case, the human need to be home in a crisis is no different for the poorest citizen as it is for you and me. And I knew in an instant that ये जो tragedy है, humanitarian tragedy, this has the potential to become a bigger crisis than the pandemic itself. और ये ऑफिस में बैठ के ये नहीं बताई जा सकती. और इसी तरह की फीलिंग मुझे थी कारगिल के दौरान, when I had to fight, plead, please, बोल के, because everyone said a woman can't go to the front. तो उसी तरह, this time of course I had no boss, and I didn't have to take anyone's permission. I didn't have to convince anybody. So that was very liberating. So me, our driver, who's been my driver for 20 years, my camera person, my producer, हम लोग 4 लोग एक मारुति अर्टिगा में बैठे, और हम घर से निकले. 30,000 kilometers, 14 states and union territories, from Delhi to Kerala, back to Ladakh, and then Bihar. And that was the phase one. And what we found was that suddenly this new baby brand of mine that I had found so difficult at the end of 2019, कि मैं इसको कैसे establish करूंगी, just by the sheer dint of hard work and quality reportage and the fact that big media was sitting at home in the first 60 days, we suddenly, the brand kind of wrote itself. And our motto became we have two mottos. One is returning news to the people, and second is go to where the story is. कि जहाँ पे कहानी है हम वहां जाएंगे, हम studio driven नहीं रहेंगे, हम talk driven नहीं रहेंगे. We will, return sort of the voice of people to the process of journalism. So I give you this background to now more usefully take you through some of the mantras that I believe cross fields. So the first is initiative. It doesn't matter what profession you're in. The initiative has to be yours. The opportunity has to be seized. The opportunity will present itself, but it will not be given to you. आपको कोई आके प्लेट पर उस पे सजा कर नहीं बोलेगा कि आप जाके कोविड की कवरेज करिए. In fact, when I went, everybody told me I was crazy. We didn't know anything about this virus. It was definitely a risk, but I saw it as a risk that was part of my job. I had signed up to be a journalist, to go to difficult places, to report during difficult situations. So it was like our, health workers had no option but to show up for work. That was their duty. I felt the journalists also had no option, but it depended on you, how far you were willing to push that sense of service or commitment to your profession. So the first principle is initiative. The initiative has to be seized. Whether you're in a multinational corporation, whether you work in a hospital, I'll give you examples of doctors that I met along the way. A doctor friend of mine based out of Bombay, Mufazzil Lakrawala, he was a bariatric surgeon. उनका daytime job था कि जो बहुत obese लोग होते हैं उनको कैसे surgically उनका weight कम किया जाए. So he was not an infectious disease specialist at all. But when COVID happened, he wanted to be part of the first responders, although it was not his medical background. So he volunteered his service कि मुझे volunteer करना है. I want to be part of this. And he offered to set up a field hospital. उनका पहला field hospital एक flyover के नीचे उन्होंने create किया. After that, for any of you who might be from Mumbai, Mumbai used to have a place called NSCI Dome. It was a sports indoor club जहाँ पे rock concerts होते थे, sporting events होते थे. Dr. Mufi took over that facility and converted it into a hospital, but he was an obesity surgeon. He had nothing to do with this at all, except that inner calling that this is a moment where you can be part of both witnessing but also altering the course of history. And so he sees that moment. And so I would say that one of the big principles of life is that you've got to take a moment, because that moment will not come again and again, nor will anyone offer you an invitation to seize that moment. You will have to seize it. And when I say seize it, I don't mean that you have to, stomp on other people's toes or you have to chino that opportunity from somebody else. I think there's always room for plenty as long as you're willing to take that initiative. So initiative for me, was presented like, as I told you in the background of what I told you, that I sat in a car and I left. And when I left, I had no idea कि मैं कहाँ सोऊंगी, मुझे क्या खाना मिलेगा, मैं कहाँ रहूंगी, मैं क्या कपड़े मिलेंगे. And as the journey went along, actually, there were nights we spent in the car, there were nights we drove 18 hours and फिर हम दिल्ली वापस आए, and then we just left. We said, चलो निकलते हैं. And that is how we ended up, I remember the first time I crossed the Rajasthan border into Maharashtra, I couldn't believe I had reached Bombay. And once we were in Mumbai, I was like, अब तो कहीं भी पहुंच सकते हैं. तो we reached Kerala, Karnataka, बिहार के border से वापस बीच में कोविड की पैंडेमिक में इंडिया चाइना कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हो गया, हम वापस दिल्ली आए. तब तक बहुत से लोगों को याद नहीं होगा, we had to do all of this by road because there were no trains and there were no buses and there were no planes. And 3 months later, the airports opened. We were able to take a flight to Ladakh, and and in the second wave, again, there was this time my focus shifted to small villages where nobody was going, the banks of the Ganga where these mystery bodies were emerging, and nobody knew कि ये कहाँ से bodies आ रही हैं, कौन इनको नदी में फेंक रहा है, कौन छोड़ के जा रहा है इनको river banks में. So I took a boat and I sailed along the Ganga. So it's all about initiative. And the fact is that initiative showed results, because a new company in a fragmented media market was able to establish itself. We got picked up by, international channels used our footage, from Australian channels to channels in the Gulf, from CNN and so on. We got written about in magazines and newspapers. Of course, the fact that I had already came with a branding of 23 years made a difference. But my colleagues also had the same number of years, and they chose not to take, many of them chose not to take the initiative. And anyone who took the initiative at this very difficult time and did good work was noticed. And you didn't have to be rich, you didn't have to be mammoth, you didn't have to be big, you just had to take the initiative. So initiative would be my first sort of mantra in this. My second mantra would be, and you have to be able and willing to take a risk, which means risk failure. You have to be able to risk failure to reach success, and you have to be willing to reinvent. A lot of people are very scared of change. Most people, most companies, for example, I remember Rajiv Bajaj once telling me in an interview this story about how he had such a fight with his father because the Bajaj scooter was an iconic product, and it was, Hamara Bajaj was the iconic line, and everybody identified Bajaj with the scooty, but he wanted to do only bikes, and he just shifted the company's direction, and he had a really bad fight with his father, and it actually introduced a kind of element of professional tension in their relationship, because the father had said, "Ki ab aap company chilaiye." And one of the big changes Rajiv brought into Bajaj was this, and it created a big jhagda, but it was a risk he took. And and the point that I'm trying to make is that in my case, the risk was physical. It was, the job, we didn't know enough about COVID. उस समय तो ये भी नहीं हमें बोला जाता था कि आप मास्क पहनिए, ग्लव्स पे ज्यादा फोकस था, गलत फहमी थी कि सर्फेसेस से फैल सकता है, लोग सैनिटाइज करते रहते थे. There was so much emphasis on contactless sort of lives, and I knew it was not possible for me. By the end of it, I was hugging the destitute. I was hugging an old woman I found abandoned at the Bandra railway station. I was inside ICUs. I was inside bastis where 8 people were living in the size of a cupboard. तो मुझे ट्रैवल करके ही समझ आया कि जो हमारी काफी अंडरस्टैंडिंग थी कोविड और कोविड सेफ पॉलिसीज और कोविड सेफ प्रोटोकॉल्स की, दे मेंट वन थिंग for the middle class and the upper middle class, and they meant one completely different thing for the poor, and especially for migrant workers. But I had to take the risk. Two risks. One was the physical risk. The second was that my audience has been an English speaking urban audience mostly. And मुझे ये risk लेना पड़ा कि मैं जो report कर रही हूँ वो बहुत ही गरीब तबके पे report कर रही हूँ. तो मेरी audience को, क्योंकि एक audience में एक instinct होता है कि you don't want to hear bad news, especially if it's not about you. Everybody wants to hear content as it relates to you. And there was already so much fright about COVID. A lot of people told me, will people watch these reports on migrant workers? Will they watch them? And I found that not just did people watch them, we had lawyers calling up to use our reports at the Supreme Court. When PILs were formed, we were able to encourage people to form civil society groups. People said, how can we help? I remember in Surat, a housing society saying कि हमारी घर में जो रोटी बनती है अब हम 4 रोटी एक्स्ट्रा बनाते हैं, हमसे और कुछ तो किया नहीं जा सकता, लेकिन we'll just make 4 rotis more and we will collect all those rotis and we'll go and give them along the highways to migrant workers. So I think that, one was, there was a risk. Is your audience going to be interested in a content that has nothing to do with them? And as I said, there was the physical risk, but more than anything else, the risk that I really took was the risk of reinvention. People had, known me as a sort of primetime anchor from a big television station. And initially I had to face a lot of barbed remarks by some trolls online. कि अरे आप तो कहाँ से कहाँ पहुँच गए, आप तो सड़क पे उतर आए, आप तो कहाँ बेचारे, आप तो कहीं की नहीं रहे, all this kind of nonsense. And you had to have a really thick skin to not react and not waste your time on all of this, because reporting was always my first love and I was doing what I really loved. But the reinvention was that I was now doing it for a different platform with a different technology, and my format of storytelling, my platform, the vehicle for delivery, I was catering to an audience that was mostly consuming content on their phones. And as it turned out, that reinvention was very good for me, because all surveys show you that even TV is now consumed on tablets or phones. There are very, very few people who actually, वो बहुत ही हमारे बुजुर्ग लोग हैं जो अब 9 बजे रात को बैठ के टीवी चलाते हैं कि चलो अब हम, ठीक है, मैं बहुत कोई बड़ा 26/11 टाइप इवेंट हो जाए या वो अलग बात है, बट डे टू डे all data shows you that there is a decline in appointment viewing on television, and all content, TV or digital, is consumed increasingly on people's phones. So in a way, that risk for reinvention put me ahead of the curve of many of my colleagues. I was still late. There were some people who had shown a greater risk than me, and they had done it before me and they had the advantage. And there's some people who did it after me. Sort of in relation to them, I had the advantage. So we have initiative, we have risk and reinvention. And the third thing is a really important thing, and that is authenticity. A lot of people sort of have this idea, and a lot of young girls in particular will always ask me, what does it need to be a journalist? And I give them 3 words, and I say, you have to have curiosity, you have to want to know ki is tarah ki cheez kyun ho rahi hai, or you have to have passion. You have to go out there, you have to really feel for it. It's not a 9 to 5 sort of job with fixed hours, news can break anytime, so you have to be really passionate about it. But the third thing is that you have to be authentic. Now, what I mean by that is कि अगर आप आंख बंद करके आप टेलीविजन के बारे में सोचिए, तो आप, मुझे नहीं लगता आज के दिन आप बहुत कम नाम याद कर पाएंगे. और इसलिए आप बहुत कम नाम याद कर पाएंगे because there's a certain kind of sameness to a TV persona, और वो सब they've merged into जिसको कहते हैं cookie cutters. They've all become cookie cutters instead of authentic individuals. Now, what I mean by authentic is you can hate somebody. You can hate somebody that you watch on your phone. You can not like their style. But if that is genuinely them, you will still watch them. You will still give them the credit or the space or the respect कि यार मुझे ये स्टाइल नहीं पसंद, पर ये उसका अपना स्टाइल है. मुझे लगता है ये बहुत ऊंचा बोलता है, मुझे लगता है ये बहुत इमोशनल हो जाती है, मुझे लगता है कि ये बहुत बोरिंग है, व्हाटएवर. मुझे लगता है कि इसकी ये ये जो इश्यूज उठाते हैं ये मेरे मतलब के नहीं है. It could be anything, or you could love them. But if you find them authentic, you will respond to them and you will build a relationship with them. And therefore, authenticity in media and management is more important than anything else. If you think of a product, if you think of a brand, it is brands that seem authentic. It is products that seem authentic to something, to themselves mostly, that work the best with consumers. And the same is true for media. Those are the brands that work the best with audiences. And I always, sort of say, and I really laugh about this. I said, you may love me, you may hate me, but you can't ignore me, because you know that I am myself. And I have never been anything but myself. And I have been myself, sometimes stubbornly, sometimes dhito ki tarah. People will tell me, "Arey, aisa mat bolo, yaar, aisa ho jayega." And I was like, no, I am myself. And too much emphasis is, wasted on completely fazool things, कि आपने makeup क्या पहना है, आपने कपड़े क्या पहने हैं, आपकी lighting. This is not what people in the end respond to. And the biggest example of this, the person I once had the opportunity to interview, who represented this to me, was Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey defied, when she came onto television in America, all the standard rules of what kind of person could make it on TV. तो हमारे जो सबसे बड़े, आप इंडियन टेलीविजन, इंडियन वीडियो इंडस्ट्री के भी लेजेंड्स के बारे में अगर आप सोचते हैं, तो आपको, चाहे आपको वो पसंद हो या नहीं, आपको मानना पड़ेगा कि आज भी जो नाम लोगों को याद है वो ऑथेंटिक है. उनके पर्सोनाज ऑथेंटिक है, उनकी पर्सनालिटीज डिस्टिंक्ट हैं, वो इंडिविजुअल्स हैं, वो कुकी कटर्स नहीं हैं. दे डोंट मर्ज इनटू वन अनदर. They're very, very distinct personalities, and most of them are people of my generation. And I wonder why that happened. What happened that my generation, good, bad, ugly, was willing to be more ourselves. Then many people came after that. And I think that if TV management led younger people into being a herd, जिसको कहते हैं ना बकरी की तरह, you shepherd cattle, they did disservice to those people, because authenticity matters above all. Now let's come to the fourth principle. I would call that have a story or stand for something. The point is that there is, let's say, 10 companies that produce soap. There are 10 journalists who present the 9 o'clock news. There are 10 journalists covering COVID, right? Let's say. First wave में तो 10 journalists थे ही नहीं. So that takes us back to risk. But let's say elections ले लीजिए. आप elections ले लीजिए कि आप 10 क्या, there will be now thousands of journalists covering the elections. Why will my audience come to me? What is it that I stand for that they will come to me? Now they can come to me. आजकल तो इतना polarization हो गया that some people will watch the people who confirm their bias कि मेरे ये views mirror करते हैं तो मैं इसको देखूं. But उसको छोड़ के, why would you come to somebody? You will come to somebody if that person stands for something. तो आप कहेंगे कि चलिए मैं फलाना पर्सन को इसलिए देखता हूं या देखती हूं क्योंकि इनका रिसर्च सबसे बेस्ट है इंटरव्यू फॉर्मेट में. मैं इस जने को देखता हूं या देखती हूं बिकॉज इनकी ग्राउंड रिपोर्टिंग सबसे बेहतर है. इसको मैं इसलिए कंज्यूम करता हूं क्योंकि इनकी विजुअल कैमरा वर्क सबसे बेस्ट है. These are, you have to stand for something, and that standing for something has to go well beyond the technicalities of your product. And that's why I use the word have a story. So whether it is a politician or a CEO or a journalist, you have to have a story to tell. So, the Prime Minister has a great story of being a tea vendor's son who was a self-made ascent to becoming the Prime Minister. One of the reasons that a lot of the conventional opposition leaders have struggled against him because they don't have a great story. But where the opposition has a great story, Arvind Kejriwal, IIT graduate, middle-class boy, made something of himself, great backstory. Mamta Banerjee, great backstory, lives simply, even today, lives in a one-room house, wears rubber chappals, cotton starched sarees, goes out there as a street fighter. She has a story. You have to have a story to compete. You have to have a story to be noticed. And anything you want to tell people, whether it's the story of a soap, a bar of soap, a shampoo, a primetime show, a political message, a public advocacy message, we are in the end all storytellers. आप कुछ भी profession उठा लीजिए, you have to have skill, but if you want to separate yourself from a large mass of people who probably have the same skill, ikka dukka farak hai, you have to have a story. So I'll recap where we are so far. So we've spoken about initiative, we've spoken about risk and reinvention, we've spoken about authenticity, and we said stand for something, have a story, be a storyteller. And I'll come to my last sort of mantra, and then I'll stop for your questions. And my last mantra is technology. You cannot, in this VUCA world, you cannot afford to not be on top of technology. Technology is going to define our future. Technology has disrupted journalism, disrupted to the advantage of startups like mine. But सब कुछ बदल दिया है. आप मुझे ये बताइए कि जो crores of money is invested in broadcast stations buying what we call OB vans. OB vans are those big vans that you see with those big dishes. They used to help in live broadcasting. They are very, very expensive. To have satellites that help you beam up signal and beam it down, very, very expensive. Distribution takes crores. Distribution for a channel means being able to watch it on Tata Sky or Airtel or whatever. Now, to me today, it is absolutely mindless that anybody is still spending this money when you can stream live on YouTube and you can actually cast that on your big TV channel. That is it. अगर आपको फोन पे नहीं देखना है और आपको अपने टेलीविजन पे देखना है तो आप उस पे टीवी पे जाके YouTube चूज कर लीजिए या कुछ भी और आपके OTT platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Hotstar, they're all testimony to the fact that the old style infrastructure that made broadcasting possible is simply redundant, and channels that are still spending that money are actually being self-destructive. But you need to know, you need to be ahead of technology, you have to follow technology. I'll give you another small example from my life. Every evening at 5 o'clock, I preempt primetime on TV by live streaming a show, not just ground reports, but a show. When I say a show, I mean a show with graphics, stickers, sound bites, pictures, and it's called Bottom Line with Barkha. And we use a software that is more professional than Zoom and Skype, because it enables all of these bells and whistles and these frills जो आपको in links पे नहीं मिलती है. But it looks, and that is our aim, that we focus a lot on good sound, good lighting, जहाँ तक हमसे हो सके. Of course, we're still dependent on internet bandwidth, but even with OB vans and जिसको कहते थे live view units, जो बड़े-बड़े आपके broadcast units से, उसमें भी signal चला जाता था. उसमें भी माइक खराब हो जाता था, उसमें भी आवाज कई बार छूट जाती थी. So people, today understand you can send the biggest guest that you're interviewing, that will mail you a link, and they will not think any less of you. Now, if you can mail somebody a link and have the same video quality, the same graphics, the same thing, why would you spend crores of rupees on that broadcast? I really, it befuddles my mind that this is actually still happening. And I feel that technology is going to outpace our understanding of journalism. And I feel that technology is disrupting everything. Look at what it's doing in the space of education, right? You've got schools physically shut down. You've got sort of edu-tech being the next big sort of space. Look at what it's done to products, right? To the service industry, to hospitality and travel. I mean, I hope some of that will return, but you're never going to escape a world now where technology has disrupted your understanding of what capital cost should be. And if technology is changing that on a daily basis, you just can't afford to say, "Yaar, mera kaam to nahi hai, main to technical person nahi." Like, I could have taken the view that I'm a journalist. I don't have to know about softwares. I don't have to know about audio. I don't have to know about lighting. But if as an entrepreneur, and even as a journalist, I would be a fool to not keep myself abreast with technology. And I think that technology will define the rules in this VUCA world. It will upend it more than once. And so you've got to be ahead, or at least abreast with the technology. Now it's 7:40. I'm just going to briefly recap my 5 points, and we have 20 minutes, I guess, for questions. So initiative, risk and reinvention, authenticity, be a storyteller, and be a technology geek, even if you think you're not one. Technology will define, redefine, and upend the future and even the present in more ways than you know. And this is true for media, this is true for management, this is true for medicine, it's true for every single profession that you eventually end up in. I know a lot of you are already from varied professions as you do this degree. So I hope this was useful. I'll pause now for your questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Like all the 5 points which you have mentioned, laid a composite roadmap for all of us to move forward. We keep on studying the operational details in our day-to-day college, and this was the content, we wanted somebody to jolt us, onto the right path, that there has to be some macro fundamentals on what we can follow our profession. I think most of us will be love to join your startup also coming in the future.
Please do. You're most welcome.
Now I'll be starting with the question answers. I'll request Jyoti Ranjan to unmute himself and place his question.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Jyoti Ranjan, and congratulations for your entire journey. And we believe that you keep inspiring us in future as well. You already have 25 plus year of experience in media, and you have been the epitome of the field reporting. What I always like about you, that how you report in the field, and I have been always fan of that.
Thank you.
So my question is that what I believe that in your early days, when you are a woman, and that point of time mostly men's used to do field reporting.
Yes.
So you might had some few hiccup in early on, and you might had caused some error. So how did you manage your first impression error? How did you try to impress your manager after committing a mistake or something like that?
Of course, it was much more difficult to be a woman in the field. And the first thing is that reporting, I was reporting spaces which were dominated by men. I was reporting conflict in the military, which was at that time had no women except as medical doctors and some chopper pilots, not like it is today. And I was reporting on politics, which was mostly a boys' club, and has remained so. So of course you had to work twice as hard, and for every little mistake you were judged 4 times as hard. How did I handle mistakes? First, I have to be convinced it's a mistake. If I'm not convinced it's a mistake, there's no power on earth that will make me guided by simply what my manager thinks. If my manager tells me it's a mistake and I don't think so, even at 23, I didn't agree. But if I think it's a mistake, I will just own the mistake. I will say, "Ye meri galti thi, this is what happened." And I'll try not to do it again. And I actually think that what most managers want, at least I now as a manager, this is what I look for in my team. Sometimes they make a really careless mistake. And I always say there are two kinds of mistakes, right? One is a mistake that is a human error. Anybody can make it. Anybody can make a human error or something because they don't know something well. But a careless mistake is the one that really irritates me. So if you make a careless mistake, then own it. Owning your mistakes is the best thing to do. But I am not I've never been a typical employee. I've never been a very, mild-mannered person. So अगर मुझे लगता है मैंने गलती नहीं की तो मैं वो गलती नहीं मानूंगी. And I find increasingly young people are also like that. A lot of people argue and they say, no, we don't agree with this. And that's how it should be.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for answering my question.
Great, ma'am. We have to accept it. So what qualities you see in your future employees? Like, if you see if they have made a mistake, what will be your attitude towards them? Whether you'll be reprimanding them or you'll be like, okay.
Oh, I will reprimand them, but the purpose of reprimanding has to be that it doesn't happen again. If your reprimand is resulting in the same mistake being repeated, then either they are wrong for the job or the role that you've given them, or there's something wrong with the way you are handling them, or a combination of both, right? Correct. So sometimes I find that mistakes happen and I've had to see this because you're using the wrong person for the wrong role. A lot of mistakes happen because of that. Some happen because of my mistake as a leader. It's not that managers don't make mistakes. Sometimes I'm too impatient or I can do something very quickly because I've been doing it for 30 years. So I get impatient if somebody else can't. That's my mistake. And sometimes it's just carelessness. It's the third category that I find unacceptable.
Careless, being careless. Yeah. Great.
Not caring enough about your work. That is a very difficult thing to get past.
Fair point. Need to jump in. Neetu Mohan.
Yeah. Hello, ma'am. You spoke about authenticity. Sometimes when we work for corporates, the corporate philosophy and our true self, there will be a conflict. So what is the best way to deal with such situations?
It's a great question. And, let me give you a real life example. I have had arguments at NDTV about certain ads that I thought that we shouldn't be taking. And eventually the organization also reached a decision. But for example, fairness products, I was very against fairness products being used, Fair and Lovely being used. And sometimes I used to really worry that, like, let's say I'm doing shows on, how this color of your skin should matter. And what if, because it's supposed to be a Chinese wall, that time I was not an entrepreneur, I was an employee. So I didn't know who the sponsors of I didn't know what ads would play in the breaks. And I used to keep thinking, oh my God. And then I used to just say that on the program that, I don't know who the sponsors of this program are. And I would have those kind of arguments, but I understand and I appreciate that not everybody works in spaces where that argument is permissible. So these are very personal decisions, Neetu. You will, and there is no perfect place. Let me also tell you that if anyone's going to tell you that there's some perfect organization where you'll disagree with nothing, right? That's not going to happen. What you have to find is your threshold. There has to be a threshold that you define and you say, ye theek hai, I don't love it. It makes me a little uncomfortable. But you know what? It happens across organizations. I'm better served within the system than outside of it. I'll try and do my best. I'll try and bring change in my own individual small way. But you will have to personally define that threshold for yourself, right? Nobody can do that for you. And that is authenticity. It's very individual. It's very what you feel. It's very much your values, and your values will also change, by the way. If you're thinking कि आपके values static रहेंगे, आपके values भी बदलते रहेंगे. But I would work in places or look to work in places where that space exists to at least have a dialogue with my immediate manager. Why are we doing this? You should be able to have a dialogue about something that bothers you. You may not like the answer, and the organization may tell you, this is what we believe. Too bad. And then you have to decide, is it above your threshold or is it below your threshold, right? And I fully appreciate it. And I'm trying to tell you that you shouldn't feel guilty about that, because every big organization will have some values that are not your values.
Yeah.
Right. So the key word is threshold. We have to make sure that what threshold we define. Right. Great point, ma'am. I'll just request Vaibhav to please jump in.
Hi, good evening, ma'am. Great listening to your 5 key points. So just a quick question. I just want to know, what pillars or what components of journalism can we enhance or improvise or change to make our youth and today's generation more aware of the sociological issues of the society? Because I think, I mean, I could be wrong, but I believe, I think today's generation is a little bit more self-centric, so how to get them more outgoing and they cannot more relate to the more sociological issues as it was a few years back. Like I was listening to great Ms. Lata Mangeshwar's interview today. It was very sad. She passed away today. So I was just listening to her interview and she's like, probably 10 years back or 20 years back when she was working, the nations, even the media industry and everything, they were, they were there for India's, development.
Yeah,
and,
I understand. I understand.
What message and how can journalism help that?
No, it's a great
perception.
Well, it's a great question. And I think the first responsibility that journalists have is that you don't lecture नहीं दे सकते. That's why it takes me back to my point of be a storyteller. So, I could have, for example, said, oh, there are all these migrant workers on the road. And why don't you care about them? To my audience, why are you posting photos of banana bread? I don't want to see your Maldives photos. I don't want to see your sardo. I don't want to see ki tumne aaj kya bartan dhoye or kya. These are all very elite things. I could have done a moral science class lecture, but that doesn't work. So if there are people who are not interested in social issues, you have to find a better way to tell the story. You have to be a better storyteller. And that's why I thought that I have to go out there and find those voices, the voices that would break the hearts of my audience, irrespective of where they were from, how rich they were, how removed they were from that reality. But there is one responsibility also on the audience. Everywhere I go, people crib nonstop about media and I relate to it. Even I crib about media, even though it's my profession. But I always say to people कि आप लोग सब कहते हैं ये TV channels पे पूरे TRP के हो गए हैं, but do you all understand what a TRP is? A TRP stands for a television rating point. A television rating point, effectively, though there are many debates over how these points are measured, is all of you. Now, if you really disrespect a certain kind of journalism or and you really, by conversely, respect somebody, you need to support them. What I find is that people are willing to pay X number of rupees for their Tata Sky subscription, which gives you all of these people together whom you may or may not like. Rethink that. If you have, 400 rupees per month to spend on journalism, maybe you need to be giving 150 rupees each to independent startups who will benefit from that. Most independent digital platforms work on viewer subscriptions or viewer support. So if you respect somebody, whoever that person is, go out and support them. You be willing to pay a little bit for the content that you like and you respect, instead of unthinkingly putting your money. The first thing I would do, I don't even know, I think we have a Tata Sky subscription. I have no idea why we have it. Like literally, I think it has become the most redundant thing to spend your money on. What do you get on Tata Sky that you do not get on live stream? I can't think of even one thing. And then within that, I would take that same money that I would have spent on my Tata Sky subscription, and I will spend that money, because I was spending that money anyway, I had budgeted for that money, on people who need that leg up. So dono ki hi responsibility hai, the journalists to be better storytellers, the audience to support better journalists.
Right. We also need to be responsible citizens rather than always claiming, always blaming or claiming the authenticity from the media houses. No doubt, ma'am. I'll request Megha to jump in.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. Thank you for wonderful insights. My question is, journalism is your passion, and after spending 25 years on the field job, which is the toughest field job being a woman, so how do you motivate yourself, and what is your mantra of being motivated, stay motivated?
Well, I think it's very, very important to do what you love and love what you do. And it's easier said than done, I know, because there will be terribly boring, difficult days in all jobs, including mine. And there are days when I have not, when I have not wanted to get out of bed, and I have not wanted to, go to the field because I'm too cold, or I'm tired, or I haven't slept the night before. और 2 दिन पहले की बात है, I was supposed to go to Western UP, and I was trying for an interview with Akhilesh Yadav and Jayant Chaudhary, and they were campaigning, but मुझे phone पे किसी से बात नहीं हो पाई थी. I had no confirmed time, and my team was saying कि मैम सुबह निकलते हैं, सुबह आप उठिए 5 बजे, and I had slept at 3 in the morning because I was finishing something else, and I didn't feel like I'm like क्यों पता नहीं मिलेंगे नहीं मिलेंगे क्या पता, you know, everybody has those days. क्या करेंगे, 4 घंटे ड्राइव करेंगे, कुछ नहीं मिलेगा. But we went, बहुत भीड़ थी, बहुत लड़ाई झगड़ा करना पड़ा. उनकी एक रथ थी, पता नहीं कितनी लड़ाई करके घुस गए उसमें, हो गया इंटरव्यू, उतर के बाकी गांव में भी चले गए. We did a good day's work, got back really late at night, but it was, I had to push myself out of the door. It was not that motivation is always just natural and naturally I'm always charged up. No one is naturally charged up at all times. There will be terrible days, there will be difficult days, there will be sad days, there will be, you know, days that you have setbacks. But if we are privileged enough, and let's face it, it is a privilege. There are millions of Indians who do not have the privilege to do what they love. But I think most of us, more or less, are doing something we like or we think we love. And the other thing I would say, Megha, is don't be afraid to change course. If you think you were going to love something and you start it and you don't love it, you don't have to do it unless there's some pressing emergency, economic emergency, or some reason that you need to do it. I'm not talking about that, but I'm saying don't be scared of change. Too many people are too scared of change. It's one life. You know, you've got to ask yourself one question, that when you were 18 and you had a dream for yourself, have you lived that dream or not? And if you haven't, please go and live it today, no matter what the risk is.
Right. So that hustler part has to be there. You need to keep hustling even
yourself. You have to hustle yourself. Baki ko to chodo, you have to hustle yourself.
Right. There can be no comfort zone. You need to keep on hustling even if you go forward. I'll request Arun to pitch in.
Thank you, Gaurav. And firstly, thank you so much, ma'am, for really, I mean, those insights that you provided. So I am basically from a software professional background. So my question actually is this. So you are a person who has, who has broken so many glass ceilings. And many of this, boundaries that you have successfully, crossed are very common, not just to journalism, but to almost all the industries across a country like India. So considering this, what is your suggestion or advice to the managers of today, to the leaders, the industrial leaders of today, on how they create an environment so that the next generation does not face the same set of challenges? One. Secondly, how do you inculcate in the next generation when you are reducing those challenges? There is another problem coming in. They don't face those problems. So how do you inculcate in that generation to go take it forward?
That second point is a very important point, and it has caused a lot of arguments in my workspace with millennials because they've not had those struggles. They do not value, some of them, they do not value that space in the way that we did, because we had to fight really hard for it. Now, because we had to fight, we really valued it. In a way, it has come easier to them, so they don't value it. They say, ye nahi to kuch aur, ye nahi to kuch aur, right? This is a running argument between all generations. I think that one, as a manager, I've changed how I hire. So how I used to recruit, used to focus maybe, earlier intuitively on educational degrees, educational qualifications, or you look at a work ex, acha ye yahan pe kaam kiya hai to ye theek hoga. Now I actually tell my colleagues when they do the first round of interviews, and I only come in on the last round, that if you do not have crazy passion for work, please don't just filter, use passion as a filter, because that's the kind of work I do. Our work is, just to give you a small example, there was a Uttarakhand mein a dam burst, and we were having dinner, my colleagues and I, and we were like, let's go, because they were workers trapped inside a tunnel, and they were like, 22 ghanta lagega, like, let's go. And we left in the middle of the night, and because that was the passion. So there are different kinds of professions. I tell anybody I interview that if you think this is a structured life, this profession is not a structured life. There could be another profession, but this is what this job is about. And if you feel that excitement, tabhi aap aiye. So I've started looking, Arun, for very different qualifications in my recruitment. I'm no longer that concerned with where somebody's degree was from, where they studied, even where they worked, because I know from experience that you can make your work ex to look anything you want it to be on a resume. I look for instead the characteristics that I think will make a good colleague for me. Equally, I try from my side to have a very democratic setup. I can be a very tough boss when I draw the line, but till I draw the line, I don't get bureaucratic. So for example, if there are days that I expect ki there is a, bomb attack or elections or we are traveling, so there are days my team has worked, pura 16-18 ghante, and the days that there are peace times, I don't think aapko 8 ghante baithna hai. I'm like, aaj kuch nahi hai, go. Right? So we don't have, I try not be bureaucratic about my work culture so that it's exciting. And I also encourage people that I give them a core responsibility, but I say, if you have interest beyond this, we will not say you are this, so you will not be allowed to do this. So people always need some sense of growth within an organization, and you have to keep giving them that. It's a challenge. There is a genuine generational clash on work ethics and work aspirations.
Right, being flexible, and I think looking for the attitude, what I think is what you tried to convey in this. Mithali, can you come in?
I have 5 minutes more till 8:05.
Okay, so sorry,
I have a conference call at 8:05, so 5-6 minutes more.
Okay, Mithali, be the last. Have a good question.
No, we can take 2-3 more questions.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am. A very good
Hi.
to you.
Hi.
We are absolutely delighted to have you here. Thanks for it. My question to you would be, now that you've accomplished so much in your life and have reached a point where people look at you as a personification of success in journalism, how does success look like from the top? In other words, what does success look like for an already successful person?
Beautiful question, ma'am. Beautiful question.
It's a super question, Mithali. And I'll tell you this, that it doesn't look like anything. You're in as good as your last story. And of course, objectively, you recognize that, I recognize about myself that I have crossed, I have won these many awards. I have been recognized in my country. I've been recognized globally. I know all that technically. But if you ask me, does it feel like success? I think, no, I am just made to always think that if you don't keep pushing yourself, you will fail. So I think one of the I was asked to give 5 mantras. I think I should have added a 6, that one, don't think too much about success, right? Think about doing really excellent work, be ambitious, but don't care too much about other people's approval or endorsement. It'll come to you anyway. But 2, when it comes to you, just keep going for more. Go for more. Don't ever feel, I've arrived. Now I don't need anything. Because the moment you feel that, you're going to plateau, right? So basically it means if you've climbed a mountain, find another mountain to climb. Because if you're going to be on that mountain, one, you can't stay on the top of that mountain forever. It will snow, it will rain. No one can stay on the top of a mountain forever. And then mountain ke baad aayega plateau. So aapko niche aana padega. What's the answer? Agar aap niche nahi aana chahte, aap ek naya mountain dhoondiye. Always find new mountains to climb.
Keep finding a new mountain, if you say, and look at the process rather than on the product always.
Absolutely.
If I can sum it up. Anand bhai, go forward.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am, for such lovely insights to your mantras. And those were really good. So, ma'am, my question is in continuation to what Mithali asked. So, now you have been like 25 years into journalism. You have achieved everything as an employee. Now you have started with your new venture. So once we reach to some success, we started achieving success and we have reached to some point, how important, like everybody has their area of insecurity, the failures, because there is much more to lose than to gain.
Yeah.
And there are some added responsibility once you start up some organization. There are people joining in. You as an entrepreneur, you have that responsibility to take yourself as well as the organization forward. So how do we cope up with those fear of failures?
It's very difficult. अगर आपको कोई भी कहता है कि they don't have a fear of failure, तो वो आपसे झूठ बोल रहे हैं. But if you look at failure as a way to tell you that you still care about your work, you might look at it differently. I used to say when at public speaking, I find it easy to speak in public because I've been doing it all my life. But I used to say before every address every time I got onto stage, behind the podium, I would, when I would start speaking, I would say, if my knees don't tremble just a little bit for at least 2 seconds, it means I don't care about this event. So I always see the fear of failure as a kind of example of the fact that I'm still doing something I care about. Imagine I'm still living a life where I care about the outcome. I am not asleep at the wheel. I'm not bored with what I do. I'm not stale. Because if I was any of these things, I wouldn't care if I fail. The second way that I tackle the fear of failure is to displace it with something else. आपका डर जाएगा नहीं, लेकिन अगर आप उससे बड़ा कोई emotion ढूंढ लें, excitement, distraction, you have to. It's a mind game. Let me tell you, it is a mind game, and you've got to consciously put something on top of the failure. And it could be something as banal as watching a murder mystery on Netflix, jab aur kuch nahi work hota, but you've got to distract yourself. You've got to see failure as fear of failure as a friend. One, it means you still care. Two, when it gets overwhelming, leave it. Do the one thing that will distract you, suck you in. It could be anything. Good food, have a drink, watch a murder mystery, read a good book, meet your friends. Having a community of support, whether it comes from family or friends, is extremely important. Have 3 people in your life whom you trust outside of your workspace.
Right.
These are small little things that sound very small, but they actually get you through some of the worst moments of your life.
Finding a bigger emotion. What's the key point which I tucked it up, I'll request Tarun and Akriti to club your questions, one after another.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Tarun and Akriti, go one after another. Tarun, first you.
Sure, yeah. Thank you. Hello, ma'am. Good evening. So it's really a privilege to hear from you, and I think there is so much to learn and take home from your journey. So, ma'am, I just wanted to ask that you had mentioned when you started your brand, so you had to unlearn a few things. Right. So, ma'am, we as executives, after having worked in the industry for a while, so, ma'am, most of us enter into a kind of set mindset about doing things. So I just wanted to ask, ma'am, what should be our mindset to unlearn? Because I think, it's actually important to, as you mentioned, to reinvent or to, take an initiative. So just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
The first is how to unlearn, ma'am. Let's take Akriti and club the both questions for you to answer. Akriti, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, ma'am. I just wanted to know, you have done innumerable shows and hosted many. How have you managed to do the prep work and did all the research and gathered all the information before you go live on the TV? Why I'm asking, because we all are working professionals here and we often host and do such things. So how maybe something that you share might change the way we prepare ourselves.
We are working in the EPGP, right, ma'am? Now the first question, how to unlearn?
I'll answer the first question second. Let me just take Akriti's question first. The first thing to research is there are certain tools that I don't allow as tools of research in my organization, and I would tell you the same. Please do not. I'm a product of the digital age, but I do not allow Wikipedia to be a source of research. Just as an example, the number of people who have got incorrect information because it is collectively edited. It has its uses for a quick read, but anything I see in Wikipedia, I always take that and I take it to a verifiable news platform where I can corroborate it, or an academic. You may not need to do that, but I sometimes even go deeper and go into an official report, an official survey, and so on. So those are just technical points. The main thing is no one can know everything about everything, right? I cannot know everything about stock markets, the economy, what the farm legislation is, Punjab, OBC vote. No, I'm not a genius. Nobody can know everything about everything. And you have to remember that nobody expects you to know everything about everything. So when you don't know something, don't pretend that you know. I find, at least in my line, I have no hesitation in saying, I don't really know this. So can you explain it to me, to a guest? None. I say, मुझे इसके बारे में बहुत कम आता है. I said to guests that I've interviewed, I used to fail math in school, so numbers scare me. Maybe you can walk us through the numbers better than I can. And certain things, when I know things, also the opposite mistake can happen. Sometimes when you know a lot about something, you are busy overloading that detail, which is not needed for a project, not needed for a program, because you are so excited that you know so much, you want to spill it all out. No, if you know something a lot and in depth, you have to simplify it in such a way that you've researched it really deeply, but you're telling it really simply. That's what great research is. Deep research, but told simply. Finally, I always sort of have a quick thing that, maybe I don't have time to read 20 articles today, but can I ask 5 really good, accurate questions or make 5 really good points? Don't try and know everything. Just say, okay, one key data point, one key sort of context or history point, right? And one key question about the current situation. So be a little more strategic about how you research, and you will find that if you don't have time, you're researching on the go, verifiable, attributable sources. So source is very important. And 3 or 4 key points. Don't look for more if you're in a hurry, and don't pretend ever to know more than you do. It's okay to say, I don't know. Tarun, finally, to your question, how do you unlearn? You know what? You need to drop your ego to unlearn. If I was going to sit on this high horse and say, hey, I was in a big TV organization, I was the first generation of TV journalists, I'm too sort of senior to be interested in lighting, I'm too senior to shoot myself, I have taught myself how to take a phone, how to configure it for professional audio, how to, we've got mandatory editing workshops in our small team of 13, where we say everybody, including me, has to learn those skills. You've got to drop ego for that. And the best leaders are those who lead from the front. If no job in your organization or your team should be too small for you to do yourself. And for that, you have to drop ego. So unlearning is basically dropping your ego, dropping your habit, and knowing that people will respect you more if they see that absence of ego in you. Keep your ego for bigger battles, not about skills.
Not the skills there. Just from last question, just sneaking in. Sorry, ma'am, I really know you are running special time.
I really have to go now.
Last minute, ma'am. Just last minute. Shobha, jump in quickly.
Hello, ma'am. How are you?
Hi.
So my question is, since you have a high pressure job on a daily basis, you are subjected to a lot of scrutiny, public scrutiny. How do you keep that mental balance? Because you are subjected to this on a daily basis, right? So how do you?
Great question. Great question.
Yeah. So Shobha, when I was younger.
Shoaib, sorry.
Okay, your name says Shoaib, so I said that. So Shoaib, your question is an interesting one, because when I was younger, I really used to think that, if you argue with trolls, agar aapko koi Facebook ya Twitter ya Instagram pe sawal pooch raha hai aur aap usko jawab doge, so that person is really interested in your answer. And over the years, I understood that actually they're just trying to play games with your mind. They just want to drag you into an argument, and that argument becomes unpleasant, and they'll say, make some wild comment, wild allegations, say something really rude, then you'll argue. I do not engage. I do not engage. I have my work. My work speaks for itself. If there is a civil question or some civil criticism where there is actually a real question, I will give a real answer. Otherwise, I do not engage. But that's something I had to go through to learn. And I also know that not all women are targeted in a way that men are not in online spaces.
Correct.
I also know that many women, I know younger women left platforms like Twitter because they couldn't deal with the trolling. And I really think it's incumbent on these platforms to offer safer online spaces for women. But for myself, I don't engage. I don't care.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Amazing. I feel
I'm
really short of words to thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I think you don't have time to, even get the word of thanks. I'll really request you to please join us again for the next session where we have been for the much more bigger audience. And thank you for your time and space. Looking forward to seeing you again for the next lecture, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great session, guys.
Yep.
Oh, really
Wonderful
great
session.
Sorry, I tried to involve everyone.
Yeah, really great session.
And very good
जिसका screen
questions
पे
also.
आ रहे थे, I was not able to pick up that question. Then men-women approach, the one man, one woman, so that gender equality.
Amit bhai, can you just stop the recording and we can do some offline discussion?
I think